Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the hard evidence to separate thousands of years of fiction from the absolute awe-inspiring facts of Khufu, better known as Khufu's horizon. For centuries, people have stared at the Giza plateau in total wonder, spinning these wild tales of magic, lost civilizations, and brutal empires. But here's the thing, the actual truth, uncovered by modern archaeology, it's arguably way more fascinating than any of those myths. So, we're going to look strictly at the data, the historical texts, and the stones themselves to reconstruct the true story of this unbelievable monument. Let's get into it. Now, to truly appreciate what we're dealing with here, we really have to grasp its sheer endurance. For over 3,700 years, this colossal monument held the absolute record as the tallest human-made structure on Earth. I mean, think about that. From its completion around 2600 BC all the way until the mid-13th century AD, literally nothing else built by human hands reached higher into the sky. It's a staggering stretch of time, and it perfectly explains why this structure has captured our collective imagination for so long. Section 1. The Greatest Ancient Wonder. Let's establish the overwhelming scale of the only surviving wonder of the ancient world. Originally standing at 146.6 meters, or what the builders would call 280 royal cubits, it was completely encased in smooth, gleaming white limestone from Tura. Over time, most of that outer casing was stripped away and reused, which actually shrank the pyramid slightly to its current height of 138.5 meters. But what remains is still roughly 2.6 million cubic meters of solid rock. To put that into perspective, we're talking about an artificial mountain made up of millions of individual stones. It is just mind-blowing. Section 2. Purpose of the pyramid. So why build it? Well, there's this incredible quote from the instruction of Harjadef. He was actually Pharaoh Khufu's own son, and his words perfectly capture the ancient Egyptian mindset. He wrote, "Look, death counts little for us. Look, life is valued highly by us. The house of the dead, the tomb, is for life." This is so crucial because it shows us that death wasn't viewed as an end at all. Instead, it was merely preparation for an eternal, highly valued afterlife. A tomb wasn't just a grave to them, it was quite literally an eternal home. And that brings us to the main point. This monument was built expressly as Pharaoh Khufu's tomb, serving 4 absolutely vital functions for his eternal reign. First off, elite tombs had to securely house the body. Second, they had to demonstrate the immense status of the deceased's family. You can kind of think of it as the ultimate ancient symbol of generational wealth. Third, it allowed the pharaoh to retain his supreme place in society even after death. And finally, it provided a dedicated place where offerings could be brought to sustain him. So the staggering size of the Great Pyramid, especially when you compare it to the much smaller mastaba tombs of that era, well, that was a very deliberate symbol of monumental social inequality and divine kingship. Section 3. Myths and Misconceptions. Before we get to the facts, we've got to look at how history turned into a massive game of telephone. Back in the 5th century BC, the Greek historian Herodotus erroneously reported that a tyrannical Khufu used gangs of 100,000 slaves to build it. Fast forward to late antiquity, and you have travelers like the Christian pilgrimage area who genuinely believed the pyramids were massive granaries built by the biblical figure Joseph. And then, by the Middle Ages, Arab legends were claiming the pyramids were built by an antediluvian king named Sarid to survive the Great Flood. They talked about flooded, haunted vaults, jars full of emeralds, and preserved bodies in gold armor. Basically, the truth just evolved into a series of increasingly fantastical tales. Which begs the question, with all these layered myths clouding our vision, from Greek slave camps to biblical granaries, how do we actually know the truth today? Well, to solve this mystery, we have to push the stories aside and look at the hard, physical, archaeological clues left behind. Section 4. The True Builders. First things first, we need to completely toss out that long-held myth of forced slave labor spread by the ancient Greeks. Modern discoveries at workers' camps right near the Giza plateau have proven that the pyramid was actually built by well-organized, conscripted Egyptian citizens. These laborers were divided into incredibly structured teams. We're talking about gangs called Zhao, which consisted of about 40 men, and those were broken down into even smaller units, each led by an overseer of 10. It was a highly organized civil project, absolutely not a brutal slave camp. And we know this for a fact because we actually have the receipts. We have 2 absolutely spectacular pieces of evidence. First, the workers themselves painted gang graffiti right inside the pyramid's hidden relieving chambers, which were found back in 1837. They left glorious team names like the White Crown of Khufu is powerful. Second, and this is just incredible, in 2013, archaeologists uncovered ancient papyrus rolls at Wadi al-Jarf. Known as the Diary of Mur, this is a literal logbook written by a supervisor from 4,500 years ago. It meticulously tracks the exact limestone deliveries from the Tur quarries straight to Khufu's vizier. I mean, you can't ask for better first-hand documentation than that. Section 5. Dating the monument. Now, figuring out exactly when Khufu commissioned this project was tricky for a long time. For example, researchers did radiocarbon dating on a cedar wood relic found inside the pyramid's air shafts. Originally, the results suggested the wood was over 500 years older than Khufu's known historical reign. But this is actually a perfect example of an archaeological complication known as the old wood problem. See, the age of organic material tells you when a tree grew or when it was cut down, not necessarily when it was placed inside the pyramid. Ancient Egyptians were known to recycle very old, long-lived trees, so testing the wood alone just wasn't going to give us a precise construction date. So, to get the real date, scientists had to get clever. They bypassed the wood entirely and went straight for the mortar. You see, the builders used about 500,000 tons of mortar to bind the stones together. And during the mixing process, organic ashes from fires were intentionally added in. By extracting and radiocarbon dating 46 samples of these trapped ashes, which had been permanently sealed inside the structure since the day it was built, scientists were able to accurately date the construction to between 2620 and 2484 BC. This lines up perfectly with Khufu's reign and firmly, undeniably roots the pyramid right in the Old Kingdom. Section 6. Mastering the construction. Okay, let's dive into the awe-inspiring logistics of how they actually pulled this off. Just imagine the sheer organizational power required here. The builders had to quarry, shape, and stack an estimated 2.3 million large blocks, weighing a total of 6 million tons. And according to the historical and archaeological record, they completed this titanic task over a period of roughly just 26 years. So you have to wonder about the manpower needed for that. A massive 1999 construction management study, working alongside Egyptologists, estimated that it took an average workforce of about 13,200 people, hitting a staggering peak workforce of roughly 40,000 people. And remember, they pulled off this logistical miracle using hardened arsenic copper chisels, wooden mallets, and ropes. There was absolutely zero modern machinery involved. Then you have to consider the sheer scale of their supply chain. While a lot of the limestone was quarried locally, right there at Giza, the massive granite blocks used to form the ceiling of the king's chamber, some of which weigh up to 80 tons, were transported on boats via the Nile all the way from Aswan. That is a journey of over 900 kilometers. The level of logistical coordination required to move 80-ton stones that distance on ancient waterways, it's almost difficult to comprehend. And despite moving literal mountains of rough rock for the core, their engineering at the crucial points was laser-focused. When the famous Egyptologist Flinders Petrie measured the pyramid, he discovered that the inner chamber blocks and the remaining outer casing stones fit together with joints averaging just 0.5 millimeter wide. 0.5 millimeter! That is a tighter fit than you'll find in most modern home construction, and they did the whole shebang with Bronze Age tools. This step-by-step process really reveals their methodical genius. First, they perfectly leveled the bedrock base, getting it completely flat to within an astonishing 21 millimeters. Second, they quarried the local Giza nummulitic limestone for the core blocks. Third, they orchestrated that crazy nationwide supply chain, shipping the gleaming Tur limestone and the heavy S1 granite down the Nile. And finally, they bound the outer layers with hundreds of thousands of tons of mortar to make absolutely sure the structure would outlast the ages. So we've solved the core mysteries of Khufu's tomb in this explainer. We've separated those wild ancient myths from the incredible, fully documented reality of the people who actually built it. But here's the thing. The Great Pyramid isn't quite done giving up its secrets. Even today, modern particle physics and thermal scans are revealing completely new, massive, hidden voids deep inside the structure, like the so-called Big Void found right above the Grand Gallery. It makes you wonder, with everything we've figured out so far, what other incredible secrets are still waiting there in the dark?